My mission is to teach history through art and to make people think more critically about false narratives. I'm Jim McMurtry, and welcome to my classroom. I would like to continue with my main thesis really here in these lessons is that it may not be the best idea to recreate the past because in many ways what we have today and what we'll have tomorrow are a lot better. And we can see that by looking at a painting, a watercolor, and it's called The Trapper's Bride. And it was painted in 1847 by a man named Alfred Jacob Miller. And there's much that we can talk about in the painting, but my focus, my interest is more about intermarriage. I want to make the point, first of all, that when the first Europeans came to the Americas under Columbus, I used to tell students in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So we've had over 500 years of intermarriage. So there's bound to be an awful lot of indigenous blood within those of us who are European ancestry and vice versa, and a lot of European and other blood in those who see themselves identify as indigenous. And what's interesting here, I can't tell you because it depends on what region of the country. Obviously, people in the eastern part of the Americas and Canada, in particular, are would have more indigenous. There'd be more Métis mixed blood people there because there's been more contact than in the West, and particularly in the North, where there's only been significant contact for really under 100 years. So there is some variety, but again, there is we're all an admixture. And blacks in the United States, for example, on average are 1/4 white or Europeans. So I think that's important. We've had intermarriage, and I think we have this strange predilection in Canada to put ourselves into these race boxes or buckets. And we can't really do that because we're all interracial, and I think that's a very positive thing. So what the context of this painting is the fur trade. And that's what built Canada. Beaver is our largest rodent. It has on its inner skin, it has a fur or a pelt that is or was really valuable for hats. That was popular in Europe, particularly in England, and because they're water resistant. And obviously that's something that beavers have to be able to do as creatures that live much of the time in the water. And the fur trade only started to die out in the mid 1800s because there were alternatives to fur hats, such as silk hats. And but for a long time, and certainly in a very significant way for about 250 years. And as part of the fur trade, you had there was always the danger, of course, of not having good relationships, of having fractious relations with the people that you're trading with. So both sides, they tried to do things to cement the relationship and make the trading successful. As I've said before, and as many know, the Europeans came here because there were things that the indigenous people had, such as fish and furs, but and in time many other things. But certainly, and part of our story is fur, and not just from the beaver. But in the West Coast, it was very important. There were other creatures that were very important from the sea and so forth. But really, the beaver was the most desired product at all. Second would be the sea otter. And third probably would be things like foxes, minks, and so forth. So when trading was done, the two sides looked at each other and tried to make sense of what it was that each wanted. And the indigenous were so often after blankets, guns, and pots and so forth. What were the Europeans after? As I said, they were after, depending where one was, after food items. One was living in Saskatchewan, Alberta, 150 years ago. What would have been of particular interest would have been food from buffalo, which was called pemmican, dry buffalo meat added with fat and often berries and so forth, helps ward off scurvy. So it was different things, but an item that, and this is not a positive thing, but at the time it was seen in this way, is that the families of young as girls would sell their their children, their daughters, as an item, as a commodity, and this was it had a positive side because this intermarriage, it brought the people together. And in many cases, that daughter ended up becoming the nexus, the connection between the two trading groups. And that was important. And they did lots of things to symbolize this communion of the different groups of the trading partners to try and avoid conflict, because of course people were always a little wary of the other side, and back in time there weren't police and there weren't hard set laws and video cameras and all sorts of things to make sure that people were honest and legal and kind with each other. So it was important that people got to know each other. So this was part of what was done, and to in many ways to sanctify the exchange. And what you're seeing here is a girl being given over to an older man. When did girls marry pre-contact, before Europeans came here? It was typical that they would do it when the girls had their menarche, when they had their first period, and from ages 12 to 14. And men, and not only in Indigenous communities, but in other communities, would wait longer until they had the ability to provide for a family. So the marriage wasn't based on love, and it wasn't based on any other form of equality, including that of age. So part of sanctifying this exchange, you can see in the painting, the father is presenting the daughter to the trapper. She looks rather demure. Probably in real life, she would have been very scared, maybe very unhappy, being given over to someone that she doesn't know. And of course, today, this is rightly seen very much as an obscenity, the very phenomenon of child marriage, of older men purchasing younger girls. There's stories of men in their 80s becoming engaged and ultimately marrying girls that haven't even been born. It's just the most awful thing. In some cultures, men can marry women today legally as young as 9. So beneath one of the underlying themes here in this lesson, of course, is a condemnation of child marriage, but we have to understand the time. And I think if we look back in history and we start saying, well, this was wrong and that was wrong and these people were bad, then we're missing the point. That theory and that practice is called presentism. Where we take the values that we have today with the material objects and comfort and everything else we have today, and the learning and so forth, and the laws and the inheritance in so many ways, and so many forms from people who came before us. It's easy for us to make judgments about those came before us, but it would be different. The men that were out trapping for beaver in order to trade and make a living and survive, that they were attracted to having female companionship, not only at night, but also in some cases to make or repair their clothing, to help with cooking, or the organization of where they're going to sleep at night, transportation, all sorts of things. Women were particularly useful, and women ended up having important roles because they were the ones often that were, again, the intermediary between the two trading partners, between their family's tribe, community, and that of the trappers. So behind the father giving the daughter is a chief, and he's holding a pipe, and this peace pipe, many knows, was a way of, again, signifying. It's sort of like before a hockey game, you have the national anthem, and both teams come together and they solemnize what they're doing by both paying homage to the national anthem, and that's what the peace pipe was. And what people smoked was tobacco. It's because that was something that originally came from this part of the world, and Europeans didn't discover it until didn't know about it until they came to the Americas. And tobacco wasn't the only product. They in the West, and this was somewhere in the prairies, they would called it kinnikinnick, and it was because it was an admixture of different things. It could be sumac, for example, different plants, herbs, and so forth. It wasn't just purely tobacco, and that's true too of cigarettes today. I lived for part of my life in Switzerland, and near a cigarette factory called Philip Morris, and in that factory, I could smell nice things. You would think cigarettes, for me, I'm allergic to cigarette smoke, so you'd think it wouldn't be very nice. But they added chocolate and licorice, mint, and honey and things that smelled very good. You know, obviously to make it more pleasant to smoke and to get consumers. And interesting for me when I was reading about this, they didn't inhale, and so that just interesting for me. Obviously, it's more dangerous. Tobacco is more dangerous when one does inhale. So this exchange, again, it was an exchange because in most cases, what the trapper wanted was fur, and what the community wanted was European goods. And so the trapper, by living in the wilderness in Canada, usually a fur trader or voyageur or trapper, different names and so forth. The French had names, the coeur de bois. They what they wanted was again fur, but there are other things that were of interest to them, and what the indigenous wanted was probably above all guns, but other things made of metal. But over time, obviously, there are different things that are exchanged. And in this particular case, what was likely the exchange was the trapper was getting the girl, and what the family was getting in return was something in the form of guns or blankets. And I can just give you an example that when I was doing some research on this, that it was typical to sell called bride price. That one young bride was worth a horse. So sometimes the trapper would offer a horse to the community to get the girl. And in other cases, people said as up to 15 guns and or 15 blankets equaled one young human being in this exchange. So the next thing that I think is really important to mention, and I did that in my last lesson, is that it's not all bad in the sense that intermarriage to me is often a wonderful thing because it's a cultural exchange and both sides learn about each other, and it just makes it's just obviously a pretty important statement about the fact that we're all part of the human race. And so I saw and I see, and people long ago saw many benefits in this intermarriage. But the sad thing about it is that kids would be introduced because there was no contraception, there's no birth control. And in many cases, the trapper, for example, would not be responsible and stay with his young family. And then those kids wouldn't be with their birth father and would go back with their mother to the tribe. But sometimes these country marriages, so the phrase la façon de contrer, what they would do is they would last, and so I think that's really fantastic, is to consider the fact that intermarriage is something that has been, and many times in our history, something that's been very, very productive and successful, and I think it's the future. I think it's a wonderful thing. But in closing, I just want to emphasize the fact that marriage back in time, whether one was indigenous or non-indigenous, whether one was living in the Americas or in an old country in Europe or Asia. It wasn't for love, it was a business arrangement. And that's still the case. I have taught girls who have been forced into arranged marriage. And so it's something that we need to fight against. And thankfully, it's not really part of Canada today, but it was yesterday. Thank you very much for listening. Bye for now.